there, Maria Jernigan here, and if you're looking for a step-by-step tutorial of how to stay in the target language while you're teaching, this is not that video. But don't worry, I've already made some of those videos, and I'll link them in the description box down below. This is a little bit different. I'm going to reflect on the things that I have learned since starting teaching fully in the target language, and really things that I wish someone had told me when I was a first-year language teacher. So this video will be excellent for you if A, you are a first-year language teacher, or B, you're a seasoned educator, but you're new to these proficiency-based methods, project-based learning, TPRS, comprehensible input, that kind of thing. This video, if you stick with me all the way through it, it's gonna save you a learning curve, but even more than that, it's gonna save you some sleepless nights that I have had that you maybe don't have to have. So let's do it. Okay, so let's start speaking with the non-native language teachers out there. So my first language is English, and I teach high school Spanish. The way I learned Spanish was through school. I just started taking classes in 6th grade and then kept taking them in high school and then in college. And for me, the only immersion experiences I had in actually Spanish-speaking countries was way later in my career. So if you are feeling, as a non-native speaker of your target language, if you're feeling any kind of insecurity about that, if you're scared to speak in the target language or stay fully in the target language during class time because you feel like your target language just isn't perfect, it's not at native level, look, you need to shed that feeling of unrealistic expectation for yourself now. And let me tell you a secret. It's not even that you as a non-native language speaker are never going to be as good as a native teacher. It's actually, in my opinion, a little bit of a superpower to be a non-native language teacher. Think of it this way. So your students are probably mostly not native speakers of the language that you're teaching, right? In fact, they are exactly in the shoes, probably, that you as a non-native teacher were in at one point. As a non-native speaker of the language you're teaching, you had to do the exact process that your students are trying to do right now. You had to figure out which verbs were irregular and try to string together sentences in a language you didn't grow up hearing. So you are proof for your students that it's not only possible to learn this language, it's possible to learn it and love it and own this language and really feel like you are at home communicating in this language that they didn't grow up learning natively. That is so powerful because it proves to your students in some unspoken way, or heck, I even talk about it explicitly, but at the very least, it shows your students that it's possible and it's exciting to learn this language. Related to that, I guarantee you that you will be asked how to say a particular word, or while you're staying in the target language in class, you'll find yourself needing a word in the language that you don't know. Or maybe, at least I wish someone had told me that when I was starting out. And I learned very quickly to embrace that knowledge gap. Again, it's kind of the same idea. It's by acknowledging that I don't have every single word in even my first language, but especially my second, I can model how to look up words in a dictionary or in word reference correctly so that for example, you learn the noun and not the adjective, well, whatever. But even more importantly, I wish that someone had told me that by modeling for my students how I talk around this word that I don't know and my self-confidence despite not having a whole entire dictionary in my head memorized, displaying that skill of circumlocution is vital for your students to learn it. And if they never see a role model trying to use the language they do know to talk about a concept that they don't have the perfect word for, if they never see anyone modeling that, how the heck can we expect them to do the same? And so it's actually phenomenal for you to admit that you don't know how to say something, or admit that you don't remember a particular vosotros form of some irregular verb, because now dictionaries are ingrained in the culture of my classroom, and I really, really encourage you to do the same. Moving right along in this vein, I wish that someone had told me when I was a first-year language teacher that literally every teacher has weaknesses. I'm gonna say that again. Every teacher, no matter if they are first-year teachers or they have been doing this for 50 years, every teacher has weaknesses, and that especially is true as a non-native speaker of my target language. So an example that hits home for me, my personal experience of this, is I can't roll my R's, which is the double R sound in Spanish is critical. Like, it can even change the meaning of a word, right? Like, perro versus perro are totally different things. Like, dog versus the conjunction but, but like, here I am unable to verbally distinguish between the two. And so here's how I leverage that, or I embrace that weakness and use it in my classroom. And I hope that it can be illustrative for you and how you might be able to leverage your own weak spots and figure out how to navigate it in the classroom. So what I do is I'm super upfront with my students, and I say, hey, and in the target language, but I explain that, like, I cannot say that sound, and that I practice it and I'm still trying to master it. So I will ask another student in the class to say it if there are any volunteers to pronounce that sound. And then I will even pull up wordreference.com, type in the word that I'm talking about, and play the sound clip, which you can, they have little audio clips of how you pronounce the word with native speakers speaking. And I will show the kids the difference. I'll play the two clips between perro and perro so that they can hear it. And I'll tell you a secret. It's never been an issue. It's never been an issue when I go to speak with native speakers. It's never been an issue in my classroom. Yeah, we get a laugh out of it sometimes, but especially if you've got heritage or native speakers in your class, celebrate the fact that there are other sources of correct information beyond you, whether that's students or whether that's native speakers or whether that's audio clips or authentic sources. Like, language is spoken in so many different ways by so many different people for so many different reasons, and we're not even perfect in our first language. By embracing whatever that weakness is and calling it out and showing your students how you get around it, if you can do the same, you will be embracing such a humility that your students won't be able to help but respect you and won't be able to help but emulate that and reach for that kind of humility themselves. Okay, the next thing that I wish someone had warned me about as a first-year language teacher, especially if you are a high school Spanish teacher, I think this is critical for you to hear me say, but this applies for any language. It is not your duty to have every single cultural factoid about every single country that speaks your target language in your head. Seriously, I had students and peers and parents assuming that I knew I knew every detail of the history of every Spanish-speaking country, or I knew every single detail about every school system in every single Spanish-speaking country. And look, at first, I felt like a fraud. At first, I was like, oh my gosh, I probably studied that at some point, but I don't remember it, right? And let's be real, when you and I learned our language in our textbooks in school, they had these little boxes on the page. It was like, cultural fact. Those go in one ear and out the other. And to be honest, I don't think that kind of cultural factoids are that useful to our kids. And I just wish that someone had told me that I'm not responsible for being this all-knowing being for all of these different communities. You need to hear that too. Instead, just model for your students how to approach other cultures and ways of being with openness. One way that I like to do that is, I'll share stories and pictures of times I have traveled abroad, or times in the United States where I've encountered people who saw the world differently from me, and use the experiences that you do have authentically in your bones that you've experienced, and let them see that impact they had on you, those experiences had on you. And I think that speaks way more loudly than memorizing a bunch of stuff about different Spanish-speaking countries just so that you can say you can incorporate culture in your classroom. Give me a break, That was a little bit controversial. Okay. We're getting worked up now. So, if you disagree, talk to me in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Okay. Now, this, applies regardless if you're native or not native. This is for teachers who are teaching with proficiency-based methods, which is to say that they're less interested in a lot of explicit grammar instruction where students memorize rules and reproduce them out of context on a quiz, but instead they learn by hearing input that they can actually understand. They learn to naturally produce it. Anyway, so look, the research about second language acquisition supports proficiency-based teaching, and the methodology classes I took in university, they supported proficiency-based teaching, and like everyone says this is what you should do, and this is this gold standard that everybody tries to reach. But the messy truth is that if your students are learning in proficiency-based ways, and I hope that you give them the chance to do so, they are not going to learn everything perfectly. They're just not. Like, they're going to make way more mistakes, especially in their first couple of years in the language, than students who are only saying things that they've memorized beforehand for a speaking assessment twice a year. I know, hard pill to swallow, but I guess, to be honest, I thought that when my students were speaking in broken Spanish, like saying, yo gusto hacer, whatever, like, I cringed, and I was like, oh my gosh, eek, this isn't working. I'm a bad teacher. But the secret is, if your students are, despite language gaps, despite vocab gaps, despite grammar gaps, so excited to genuinely communicate their own thoughts in the target language that they are trying to piece together the language in new ways to say stuff, and it's not perfect, but they're getting it out there and they are not afraid to, that is the win. That is way more exciting, it's way more empowering, and it's way more of a long-lasting love for the language than any teacher who's just having them memorize the ser conjugations and give it back on a quiz, No hate, to any teachers who teach differently than I do, of course, and that's actually something I'm going to talk about in a second. But look, if you embrace proficiency like I have, your students are going to make a ton of mistakes, and it means you're a great teacher. Seriously. Jumping off of that last point, I wish someone had warned me that all teachers teach differently, which I know seems like such a trite thing, but when I came into the teaching world, especially after studying how to be a teacher and studying teaching methods, I had this deep belief, and I still do, in project-based learning and in 100% target language comprehensible input 100% of the time. And if you share that, you need to subscribe to this channel. Like, if you share these passions and you also teach Spanish, like, you belong here. But the point of that is, you're going to work most likely with colleagues who are more traditional or approach things differently. And that's okay. That's okay. And it doesn't mean that your professional work can't be fulfilling. And it doesn't mean that your departmental meetings have to be this massive power struggle. And, I never explicitly had that happen to me, but I was worried about it. I was worried that I would be called out for using a method that veteran teachers weren't using. I was afraid that I wouldn't get along with my coworkers in some ways. And I was afraid that it wouldn't work, and that my students would be so used to traditional memorization-based techniques that I would come in with my rose-colored glasses so excited to do project-based learning and proficiency-centered teaching, and that they would be turned off by it, and it would just fall on its face, and that I would be a failure. But the good news, and what I wish you hear from me, is students can and should be introduced to many different teaching styles and different approaches, because it helps them kind of navigate how they prefer to receive information and process it and all this stuff. So, own your teaching philosophy. If you are like me and you feel deep in your bones that student-centered methods is the way to go, own that and make space for others who can show you other ways of doing things. That's fine. Let's talk for a second about physical appearance. If you are a career switcher, or you look older than your age, or you're mad tall, you can just like laugh a little bit at me in this next bit and it'll be more relevant to you in the next tip. But so I'm 5 feet tall. I look extremely young. And like, I actually was really young when I started teaching. And when I would tell people that I was about to go into the high school classroom, they were consistently, the response was, ooh, good luck with that. like consistently. And then like, you know, the jokes came when I started teaching, and at first they weren't even jokes, which kind of is worse. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were a student. You know, you look so young and you're so short. But here, if that applies to you, or you're just worried that like your haircut doesn't look adult enough, or you're worried about wearing a backpack instead of a briefcase to the classroom, like, let me tell you, appearing younger or just being different than your students' expectations of what a teacher should be, it's actually awesome. And really, really, really quickly, I realized that in my case, I could relate to my students way better, or the perception was that I could relate to them better than some of my peers who are a little bit later in their career. And there's really benefits. No matter what age group of a teacher you are, there's benefits at every stage. And so the reality is, everything and anything that is a part of you is exactly what your students need. And it's exactly what's going to help you serve them in the best way that you can. I wish someone had told me that self-acceptance is the key to being authentically empowering and authentically effective and like at home in your own skin as a teacher. Because really, if you can go into your classroom your first couple of years with that confidence, knowing that self-assurity will really, really help you. All right, next thing that you should know, that you should be prepared for, is that when students are learning a language, so much more is involved than just learning the words. And, you know, any teacher can explain to you that a student's self-confidence and the relationship the student builds with the teacher and the other students is important, but in a proficiency-based language classroom, where you are staying in the target language as much as you can, so many times students silence themselves, or they try to at first, or they're uncertain, or it gets in the way of their learning in some other way. They feel excluded because they don't believe that they can communicate in the target language. And, you know, if you're a pedagogy junkie like me, you'll know the term self-efficacy. That term just means like the students believe that they can be successful. And gosh, I did not realize when I showed up on my first day, my first year teaching high school Spanish, 100% in the target language, day one, I didn't realize that the real first barrier that I had to figure out how to help my students overcome was the belief in themselves that they could actually learn this language. They could actually acquire, you know, like this language without having to do these crazy flashcards and verb conjugation charts and drills all the time. And getting the kids to see that they have it in themselves to open their mouth and communicate their thoughts, even if it's not perfect, even if they don't have every word. Getting over that hump of their belief in themselves is not something you can do for them, but it's sure as heck part of your job. And it's a way bigger part of your job, or was a big part of my job, than I realized at first. And if you try to ignore that, a couple things happen. The first is that your students don't really respond to you very well, because they might feel, you risk some students feeling forced to speak only in Spanish or only in the target language and not feeling safe. And that causes resentment and behavioral issues and like all this stuff, right? But the other thing is, if the students are so terrified to speak because they don't believe that they can, it looks like a really disengaged classroom. Especially in your first couple of years, you're going to think that you are failing them because they're not participating. or they're not speaking fluently yet. And oh my gosh, we learned this stuff. We've been going over this one construction for 2 weeks. How can you not say it back to me? It looks like it's a learning issue, and really it's deep-seated in self-efficacy and self-confidence concerns. So I wish that someone had warned me of that. But, I found out soon enough. And if this is you, or if you feel like this is you, I hope you come back to this video and rewatch this moment right here, because I wish that someone had told me that exactly what you're doing is enough. And as long as your students are connected with you, they feel like they're safe, and they're trying to communicate, and you're helping them find a love of learning, find a love of communication, and helping them start to piece together how to communicate their own original ideas and messages, that is more than amazing. And oh my gosh, are they learning? Oh my gosh, should you be proud of yourself? And if you can internalize that, you will be so far ahead of the game than where I was when I first started as a language teacher. Use exactly who you are and what you believe to your benefit, because honestly, who you are is your superpower. And the reason you're going to be an amazing teacher, or you're going to continue to be an amazing teacher, is because you're exactly who you are. That's all for this week. I hope that you share this with someone in your life that you think needs to hear the message, because gosh, I wish I had a time machine. I wish I could give this video to myself. But please feel free to subscribe below. I send videos out every single week about project-based learning in the target language, staying in the target language 100% of the time, proficiency-based methods, and high school Spanish stuff in general. So I hope you'll stick around for the next one. Thanks so much.